Alright, now I'm going to show you how to do some basic element selection in Scrapy using XPath expressions and CSS selectors. Of course, as I said, if you don't know what our CSS selectors and XPath expressions are, that's not a big problem because in the next section, I'm going to cover them in depth. So let's say we want to scrape the title using XPath. I'm going to show you first the steps you need to follow before scraping any website, and then we're going to write one XPath expression and one CSS selector which will get us the title, okay? Alright, so first thing first, we need to disable JavaScript as shown in the previous video. And the reason why we should disable it is because, as I said previously, Scrapy will return the raw HTML markup without JavaScript. Therefore, we need to make sure that in our browser, we get the same raw HTML markup that Scrapy will return. So I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-I to open up the developer tools, and then Ctrl-Shift-P to open up the command palette. Let's type in JavaScript. And let's choose the second option, disable JavaScript. Alright, let's refresh again using the shortcut Ctrl-R. Now, since we want to scrape the title, we need to select it first. For that, you click on the inspection tool, and then you select the title. There we go. Alternatively, what you can do is select the title, right-click on it, and then click Inspect. This will do the same thing, okay? So the title, as you see, is simply an h1 tag with some text in it. Now, to write an XPath expression that will extract the title, we need to test it first before implementing it in Scrapy. For that, you click on this Elements tab, and then you press Ctrl-F, and a new search box will appear here. So to select this h1 tag using XPath, we write /h1, as simple as that. And as a hint, Chrome will highlight the element being selected in yellow, and down here it will show us how much element were selected to. So since this HTML web page does only have one h1, we only get one element in return. Now I'm going to copy this XPath expression back to the Anaconda prompt. Let's create a variable called title equals to response.xpath. And then as an argument to the XPath method, I'm going to paste in the XPath expression as a string. There we go. Now let's output title. So we got a list. That's because of this square bracket here and here. Inside that list, we have a selector object with two properties. The XPath property, which is the same as the XPath expression we used or we passed as an argument. And then we have the data property, this one, which contains what this XPath expression has returned. So we get the h1 element with its text. Now, if we want to only return the text content instead of the element HTML markup, we need to make a slight change to this XPath expression. So I'm going to use the same line of code, and we need to add a function to our XPath expression called text. So /text with two parentheses because it's a function. Now I'm going to press enter again. Let's output title. And voila, now we have the data argument or attribute equals to the text that is inside the h1 element. Now, if we want to return the title as a string, we simply call title, dot get. Perfect. Now let's do the same using a CSS selector. So I'm going to create a variable called title underline CSS equals to response.css. And as an argument, we need to pass a CSS selector as a string. So in CSS, to select any element, we simply call it by its tag name. So h1. And to get the text inside that element, we use : text. Now let's output title underline CSS. So we got a list which contains a selector object as before. And then XPath equals to this XPath expression. And that's interesting, right? We used a CSS selector, but Scrapy did cast that CSS selector to an XPath expression. And that's one of the reasons why I don't use CSS selectors in Scrapy that much. Of course, just because of this extra step, there will be a slight negative impact in terms of the performance of your spider. Now again, to return the data as a string, we call title, underline CSS dot get. Perfect. Alright, now back to Chrome. And let's say this time we want to get all the countries. So I'm going to click on this inspection tool and select this first country. Alright, so we have an A element which does contain the country name as a text. So I'm gonna delete this XPath expression and replace it by \a. Okay, so we got 256 element. And notice this first element is not actually a country, instead it's a script tag. Means if we leave our XPath expression like this, we'll end up getting pretty much all the A elements, including those script tags that are not a country. So we need to change or limit the scope of our XPath expression. So I'm gonna click on this inspection tool again, and let's select this first country. All right, now notice this A element is inside a TD element, right? So down here, before we actually select the A element, we only want those who are inside a TD element. So let's add at the beginning, after the double slashes, TD/A. Beautiful. Now we get 233 country or element, and this first one does indeed represent a country. I'm gonna copy this XPath expression back to Scrapy shell. Let's create a variable called countries equals to response, dot XPath. And I'm gonna paste in the XPath expression as a string. There we go. I'm gonna add the slash text function to make sure that we only return the text element. And since now we do have many countries, we can't return them as a string. Therefore, we can't use the get method like this. Instead, we use get all, which will return a list of countries. I'm gonna output countries. And voila, we do indeed get all the countries. Now let's use a CSS selector instead of an XPath expression. So I'm gonna create a variable called countries underline CSS equals to response.css. Now, since we want the A elements inside the TD element, we write TD space A colon text. Let's call the get all method. And let's output countries underline CSS. Beautiful, we get the same output as before. So this was everything for this video. In the very next one, we're gonna use the same XPath expression we used in Scrapy shell in the spider we generated before.